Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we've seen Diego Maradona.
Is the film called Diego Maradona or Maradona?
I think the posters seem to have just Maradona, but the title on the BBFC 12A card was Diego Maradona. The title at the start of the film is Diego Maradona. And I think it's important because the film makes quite a point of Diego and Maradona being two parts of the same person.
And actually, I thought that the film put it so wonderfully, and actually something for people who work on stars to think about, because basically the film argues that, so Diego and Maradona are different, but Maradona, the star persona, drags Diego through things that Diego himself might not have wanted to. That the star persona exerts a pull and a push on the real person, whether they like it or not, that kind of, they're not the same, they're distinct, but they're linked, obviously, they embody the same thing, but that the image and the persona kind of has a different pull.
Yeah, in the film, that idea is introduced by one of the interviewees. You only hear them in voiceover. All the visuals are TV and news and archival footage. But the voiceover interviewee is Maradona's personal trainer or fitness trainer at Napoli.
Yes.
And he's the one who says, I want Diego, not Maradona, something like that. He's the one who introduces the idea of the difference between the two of them, that the film then allows itself to kind of pick up on.
He says something like, for Diego, Diego's a wonderful person and lovely and kind, and, I'd do anything for Diego. Maradona is a different story, right?
Maradona is the star. Maradona is the version that can't show any. That's right. He says Diego is a person with insecurities, a wonderful boy. Maradona can't show any insecurities, can't show any weakness. He's the version of Diego Maradona that is shown to the public and has to be strong and so on and so forth.
And is a kind of monster,
Yeah, kind of becomes that way, I suppose. And also the title. I think the way the title is actually shown on screen kind of is a slight indication of that, because it's Diego Maradona with a line between the two words, and it's not something that you particularly pick up on. It's just like it's like a Final Cut Pro sort of template title thing, but I think it is kind of communicating that in a way. There is a separation between Diego and Maradona, which is quite interesting. And I suppose I should say, for the purpose of anyone who hasn't seen it, this is a documentary made by Asif Kapadia, who previously made Senna in 2010 about Aryton Senna, the Brazilian Formula 1 driver who lost his life in Italy in a crash, and in 2015 Amy, which is about Amy Winehouse.
Did you end up seeing Amy?
I watched Amy on Tuesday night after you told me I would love it. And
Did you?
Hated it.
Oh, I hate you.
I'm sorry, I really...
Why did you hate it?
Well, I can go on about it if you want. I had a really negative response to it.
Why?
So, first thing is, I'd seen Senna before, and I didn't remember Senna all that well, and I didn't remember finding it that interesting, to be honest. It just hasn't really lingered long in the memory for me, so that's, take it or leave it. Amy, to me, felt... Actually, I made one or two notes. Let me just quickly find, because...
I lived in her albums for a period of 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
They really spoke to me. I loved her. I loved her voice. I thought what happened to her was tragic. There are interesting similarities, actually, because you see the drugs destroy the person in Amy, and you see the drugs destroy the person in Maradona.
Well, the thing about Amy is it's about the media. There's a central difference between Amy and Maradona, in that Diego Maradona is alive to see this film be made. Naturally, he's been interviewed for it.
Yes.
Well, he seems to have been. It's not...
He has been, yeah. I think he has been.
Whereas Amy Winehouse obviously had died, and the film ends with her
But the father
death.
was involved, wasn't he? The parents were involved in the making of the film.
No, well, I think the thing was, I did read something about the dad. I think he'd been interviewed. He'd definitely been interviewed for it. But then when the film came out, he was unhappy with certain aspects.
Well, he was unhappy because
he went off and made something else.
He was unhappy because he's shown Like, I mean, I think the reason why... What's the name of this director?
Asif Kapadia.
Asif Kapadia, why he's making such great documentaries, is that he shows the contradiction. So in Amy, you see, you know, the father loves his daughter and is proud of her and whatever, and at the same time he's also exploitative and exploiting of her.
Right,
you know?
I think the film is exploitative though as well. I really had a problem with it.
Oh.
Because, and this is the thing about Amy herself not being alive for it, not being able to respond, not being able to have any control of it or anything like that. Control is maybe the wrong word, but any ability to respond, you know? Because it's a film that says the media is... It shows the media kind of hounding her. It basically shows this girl who had problems. She had significant problems, and she needed help. You know, it's rather like Britney Spears had the same thing in that was 2010, 2009 or something, when she was in a really bad way for a year. And kind of all the late night hosts were making jokes about it. She did rehab, out of rehab, all this, that and the other. And at some point you're going, this is beyond cruel. There's a point in Amy where they show a little bit that Graham Norton on his show makes a joke about Amy Winehouse being a crazy person, and the audience just laughs. And you're going, this is beyond cruel. But the film itself is indulging in it too. It's rubbernecking, and it's exploitative and salacious and prurient. And I really didn't like it. And it's all built out of home footage. Well, a lot of it is built out of home footage, particularly from when she's younger, before she was famous, obviously. And at some point I'm going, why am I allowed to see this?
Because I remember seeing, you know, the tabloid covers showing you the tweaks of the heroin needles in between her toes, and that being front page Britain. So actually, I don't think the film, you know, showed anywhere near, you know, what the tabloids were showing every day for 3 years. I
understand that, and I'm not like, I don't absolve the press for, you know, the way they behave towards or anything like that at all. I think it's disgusting. But I think it's just as disgusting to say, to kind of put out this film that says, you know, what the media was doing was horrible and she couldn't cope with it, but we're going to be just as invasive. If you really cared, you wouldn't have done it.
No, but I think,
hated it.
I mean, I think it's because she's dead that you could then do this. And I didn't feel it was invasive at all.
Oh.
I mean, what was invasive was the daily barrage of front page stories about her deterioration, which were like completely cruel and unfeeling, you know. But that had already happened, you know, before the film was made. So, and I think one has to deal with that. It is about the media. And actually, I think there is an interesting similarity, because this is also about, I don't know if it's about media, but it's about ideology, the Maradona film.
It's certainly about relationship to the media. There's a very similar thing as to Amy in the way in which he cannot go out without being hounded, without being kissed, without being covered by people, without the photographers and the microphones being all around him, and that sort of thing. And his similar difficulties coping.
Okay, let's move on to talk about Maradona. So what did you think of it?
Okay. I liked it more. Partly for the reason I stated, which is that, you know, if nothing else, whatever happens, there is a kind of a right to reply implied by the fact that Maradona is alive. But I liked it more because I think it's more substantial. And I think it's... You know, to a point, I don't get these films.
Oh.
I don't get these films where it's a focus on a person. It's like a look at a troubled genius or something. I don't get it. And
okay, well, I can elaborate on that, because I don't think it's just on a person. I think the person is also kind of a metaphor, and a really current one. I think it's a great, great film. And I think it's really a great film because, you know, it helps you understand how easily the crowd, the rabble, the mob, you know, or how a group of people can be turned into a mob, right? And the mob mentality, and, you know, how kind of people are built into, you know, icons, and they, you know, they signify on the one minute they're God, and the other minute they're literally the devil, right? And kind of, and how that's signified through it all, and kind of, you know, the individual kind of within that construct that's imposed by others. I think it's a really timely film. Yeah, kind of particularly in a Brexit moment where I think we're all being manipulated in the way that you see kind of all of the media manipulate things, around national lines, the feeding of the nationalist mob in Italy, right? Kind of that there's so many factors into it because, there's the question of gender, there's the question of race that plays into it, there's divides between kind of North and South, right? There's the mafia's relationship to the government, and each has an interest that exceeds that of the individual person. And I think the film lays it out like absolutely clearly and demonstrates all the iconography around it. I mean, kind of, people collecting the blood of, stealing the blood of Maradona so they could put it into a saint, right? Stuff like that. I mean, I think it's just extraordinary.
There's more of a kind of structure and a kind of official structure to the way in which Maradona's life is kind of made difficult and controlled than there was in Amy. There is the mob, the Camorra crime family that runs Napoli, basically, that picks up on him and gets involved with him and then starts to control him essentially through cocaine. Later on in his career at Napoli in the late 80s and early 90s. But there's also the boss of Napoli, the president, who, there's a pivotal moment towards it's about 89 or so, when Maradona's been at Napoli for 4 or 5 years and he wants to leave, and he is starting to understand the control that he is under by the crime family, I think.
Yes.
That seems to be the kind of suggestion, and it's when they've won the UEFA Cup and he wants to go, and the president says, "I'll do anything to keep him here at any cost. I'm his jailer."
That's right.
He says, "I became his jailer." It's a moment where Maradona, you understand he's being used by two different
That's right.
organisations.
And I think it's a metaphor. You know how there are books that have titles like something, How to Understand Life Through Football. Yeah, that kind of, football is seen as a metaphor for life. If you work hard and you practice, you get better, then kind of you're not just an individual, you're part of a larger whole, you're part of a team. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Kind of, the thing is used as a metaphor for life and how to have a good life. But actually, what it's never used for is also as a metaphor for capitalism, right? That you're just a body that's used up and take all the juice taken out for somebody else's benefit. You're just kind of a labor or a gift for someone else to extract and kind of make money off. And once kind of you're done, you're useless to them, right? Kind of the film shows that aspect of, kind of capitalism at work through kind of the figure of this individual, kind of, who has a use value, right? And who has a sales value, and who has a symbolic value, but kind of, how they just use it up and throw him away as soon as, that's used up, as soon as they have no use for him, or as soon as they can use him differently, right? To play a game of national politics rather than a game on the pitch. He's used up and thrown away and destroyed, because the film also shows how really he is literally destroyed, yeah? So that kind of, when he chooses over Argentina over Italy, which is so unreasonable. Which person would not choose their own country?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's completely unreasonable. But him having made that choice means, that then kind of the judiciary is after him. He's entrapped in terms of drugs, kind of the mob gets rid of him, and the whole kind of government is out to get him through taxes and whatever in a way that they hadn't cared before.
Yeah, there's a kind of
there's
him
a hounding.
There's a taking the opportunity to get him for drugs and to give him a significant ban, the kind of ban that hasn't been seen before, to punish him for beating Italy in the semi-final in the '90 World Cup.
To punish
in Italy and in Napoli.
To punish him for the choice he made that you can't imagine anyone else making a different choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's extraordinarily unfair.
So the film to me is great because it shows, those contradictions. I think it's a very complex film, really. It's and I love Maradona, whom I didn't really have much of a view on before, right? Like
his reputation in this country is not great.
And actually, but it's very interesting because I think the film humbles English television viewers.
Oh, I agree.
Because actually that moment, which is so important in the national psyche here about football, is just a tiny little element of Maradona's career, right? Like in the film, that's not that important.
In the film, it's not that important. I do think
given a minute.
I do think it was a little more important actually to Argentinians than the film portrays it as, but it wouldn't. It would slightly privilege.
I think it's interesting because I've seen entire Sky television documentaries on that moment, right? Yeah. And here it's like a minute.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's obviously a much greater context, but that was a huge moment. I mean, because the England-Argentina football rivalry is significant, and obviously it comes particularly from the fallout of the Falklands War in 1982. Yeah. And it's a real intercontinental rivalry. I don't think there really is another one in world football. And for Argentinians, it's kind of Brazil, Uruguay and England are the big rivalries. For us, we probably consider Argentina second to Germany, which is nuts, because actually Germany don't care about us at all. I think for them it's Holland. But England and Argentina, even there was a friendly in about 2006 or something between England and Argentina that was crazy, and there was a last minute winner, and you thought this is a friendly, so they're big games. And that match in 1986, where in the space of 3 or 4 minutes Maradona scored the most evil, cruel, cheating bastard dirty goal ever, and then scored the greatest in World Cup history. The film does say this is the one match that sums up Maradona. Right. There's this side and that side.
Yes. And I love him because one of the things that the film makes so vivid is his humanity, right? So on the one hand, the fact that he's not just a working class kid, he's dirt poor, barely subsistence kind of
from the slums in Argentina.
From the slums,
in Buenos Aires.
But sub working class. That he's been supporting his whole family since the age of 15. There's a lot made of race in the film, though frankly I don't see him as being any darker, than kind of most Argentinians I know, but the film keeps referring to him as black. And then his wife or his 2 girlfriends talk about how tender he is, and how loving he is, and so on. So, and how he loves to dance, and there's a way in that they humanize him, and actually all of the footage that you see is him being really quite human, even in his worst moments. So, for example, the fact that he lies about having a child, right? You think that's despicable, and on the other hand, you think, oh, I might have done that also, confronted with the same choice. I mean, it's a human choice, it's a human weakness. Right, you recognize it as he's not special about having lied in that context about something like that. I think most men would have, actually. So, he's not like this god or this saint. He is really kind of, a flawed, weak person like everybody else, really. So I love that element of him, really. And the fact that when you see him with his teammates and so on, he's so eager to please and to be part, and he's so generous with his praise, giving everybody else credit, for things that are attributed to him, and then I love the bit at the end where he's being interviewed and he cries about his life, right? And he's got no qualms about it. It's almost like it's raw emotion that you have access to,
Yeah, there's a kind of culmination going on in that moment, which is an interview from 2004, I think. Yeah, he's 44. And the film has made a jump of about 13 years, because last time you saw him was him leaving Napoli in 1991 in a very quiet way, basically, just this kind of escaping. So the film jumps right ahead to this, and he's put on a lot of weight, and he's kind of stuffed into this shirt that's not big enough for his neck, and he looks in bad shape. I mean, people are kind of he's looked like that for a while,
But he looks in terrible shape.
Yeah.
I mean...
it is this kind of moment of culmination of everything that you've seen from basically 1960 to 1991 has kind of created this version of him now. There's this feeling of, that he's a man who is living his own history.
Yes.
In a way.
I identified with him completely, because he's actually, and there's something physically about him that, it rings my heart, and maybe it's a kind of identification, right? Because he's really short and stocky, and he's not even very good looking or anything, right? So, you know, kind of whenever you see him in group shots of some football celebration, he's always like the shortest, squattest guy there. I mean, there's nothing about his physique, you know, that's imposing. You know, he doesn't have long legs, he doesn't have big shoulders, he's not tall, right? Like, you know, so it's almost like sheer talent, really, that kind of propels him kind of forward, right?
The footage that it shows of him playing in the early 80s at Boca Juniors, the guy moves unbelievably. He's smooth and he's fast and he has insane ball control. And I think, yeah, if you didn't know anything about football, you would kind of get why he was a sensation.
Yes.
You know, he was supernaturally connected to the ball.
I mean, watching that footage, it is extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, and it's such a pleasure to see it. And it continues. You know, even as the film goes on into his time at Napoli, it's still just as pleasurable to watch. And then a little bit later, when you know, he's kind of getting to his late 20s and early 30s, and he's starting to put on some weight.
Yes.
And he's starting to go through kind of rough times and get into drugs, and he's in the kind of depths of a cocaine addiction towards the end. He's still captivating to look at on the pitch.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of amazing. It's sensational to watch just play football.
I love him, really, because, I mean, he does all these terrible things, and in a way he's so weak, right? And yet, you know, I mean, one of the things that these rise and fall stories, you know, they always fascinate me, is I remember David Foster Wallace talking about him having been either state champion or close to state champion, and it's this article that he wrote on Federer, I think.
Yes, yeah, I know the one.
You know, and basically he says, you have to be a freak to be playing at that level, right? Because it means that you're training all the time, that you think about nothing else, you know, that there's like this discipline imposed, right? Of like training and concentration. I mean, so there's, you know, we have stereotypes of football players, which is basically they train for half an hour in the morning and then like, you know, they just watch like videos like for the rest of the day, right? And play 2 matches a week. But actually, I think to be a world-class athlete and to be playing at that level, the focus has to be enormous. And basically, his sister says, you know, basically he gave up his life after the age of 15, like from the age of 15 onwards, right? Like kind of, you know, his life was not his, is what she's saying, yeah? It was all kind of sacrifice. So kind of, you know, what you see in the film is the drugs, yeah, and the partying and so on. And actually, what you don't see is kind of, you know, what must have been a relentless training, yeah, to be able to kind of play at that level. And I think he makes it all feel really human and messy, right, in the way that these films normally aren't. Like, you know, kind of, there's nothing clear-cut. It's all like conflicting emotions that's kind of spill out, you know, with a great deal of love and regret, you know, which I think is kind of, you know, when people reach a certain age, you know, there's probably kind of quite a lot of that, right? Like, you know, it's kind of, there's a lot of failure in everybody's lives and a lot of sadness and a lot of disappointment. And, you know, he kind of embodies that, right? And he kind of suffers for it, you know.
Yeah, like a saint.
A little bit, you know. I mean, the imagery, I was really struck. Because, as you know, I am kind of like a football lover, but I'm not a football fanatic, right? And actually, some of the things in the film, to me, were just like gobsmacking, you know. So, for example, you know, I always thought that like the English kind of were rather terrible, you know, in the terraces, but nothing compared to the Italians, right? Like, you know, I hope you all get tuberculosis and cholera, right? Like, you know, it's like, I mean, it's disgusting what they say and what they chant, and they're chanting it, you know, like you know, within Italy to other Italians. It's kind of absolutely kind of gobsmackingly shocking.
Part of it is that Napoli or Naples is seen as, or Neapolitans are seen as not Italian. You know, at one point they're talking about that they're the Africans of Italy. They're the non-persons.
I know,
yeah.
But within Italy, that would be like, for example, a way for Londoners to talk about Manchester or something, right? Like, you don't get that level of like hatred, right?
Well, to be fair, you do still get fans, and it's disgusting. You do still get fans singing about the Munich air disaster that kind of ended Manchester United team. I can't remember the year, the 1960s. You do still get fans chanting about that every now and again, which is horrible. But that is kind of, as far as sort of gross, sort of personal, like really properly offensive club-wide attacks, that's kind of it in this country. English football has had a horrible history with hooliganism, with violence, and it was basically every English club was kicked out of Europe in the 1980s because of it. But kind of it's come a long way. You see it in you still see a great deal in Italy and in Russia.
Well, maybe it's my ignorance. I have not seen anything like what we get to see in this film. Of how the Napoli team is treated as it goes through Italy.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really it's so shocking that I laughed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so unbelievable that it's funny. And within that, the way that, Maradona is pictured, like, as a saint, as a god, as like, and then how quickly the fall from grace, how quickly it is. Once you are no longer the vehicle for my dreams, you are shit, right? That's kind of what the film is doing. And in that sense, I think it's a really kind of fascinating kind of vehicle through which to explore ideas around capitalism,
There is a kind of continuing theme of Maradona as God, or as a god,
and
also it's a very, very Catholic country, believe it or not, Italy, and he's kind of pictured. He's drawn into sort of murals of saints and things like that, and everyone has a picture of Maradona in his house in the way that they would also, they put it next to the picture of Jesus, and people talk about him as. There's one point where an interviewer, I think, says, "You are a god." Essentially, and he says no, I think so. He's kind of humble about it. And then right at the end of the film, when you jumped forwards to 2004, and he's walking towards the studio to be interviewed, and he's in that terrible shape, as you say. Someone says you're bigger than the Pope, and he says that doesn't mean very much.
Yes, that's not saying very much. The Pope is not so great.
So that changes quite significantly.
Yes, I must say I really love this film. I think it's a really complex and interesting film that not only kind of explores ideas around, who is Maradona and the rise and fall of a famous iconic star, who marked an era in football. But actually, I think it goes beyond that, right? It kind of, it teaches you something about the North-South divide in Italy, about kind of ancient grudges between kind of different counties around kind of iconicity, and the way that kind of symbols are used to mobilize emotions by the mob in both senses, the mob as in the mafia, but the mob also as in like this amalgamation of people, who kind of lose their reason, basically. You see that, and it has fantastic footage of all shots from within the stadiums, and it's very frightening to see all those smoke bombs kind of going off, and and people on the pitch, and kind of the reaction on the terraces. I mean, to see it from their point of view, there's this shot where Maradona's going in with his child, and you think, why would you bring your child into this war zone, right? Like, that's what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
So I loved it.
Well, that's good. I like it more having talked about it. It's funny. I really enjoyed lots of parts of it. I really enjoyed watching him play football. I really enjoyed kind of his early story and that sort of thing. And then there would just be sections, and it was always the sections where it was his family, and his cheating on his girlfriend or wife, and having a kid with a Neapolitan local which he denied for years and years and years. Those moments made me feel like I did in Amy again. Going, why can't we mind our business?
You're too judgmental. I think that's a thing.
I don't think I am. Why can't we mind our business?
Well, I just think
and that was the problem with Amy, because this film is about people kind of not minding their business to a certain extent with the media and stuff. Amy was all about that, and the film was indulging. It was playing the game that it was decrying at the same time, and that's what I hated.
Well,
it was just saying, here's more of her.
Like what you're doing, I think, is kind of mistaking categories, because the thing is that these people are not just people, they're also symbols, they're stars, they signify, and also battles have been fought over what they mean in public for years, right? So I think it's very difficult not to deal with those things.
I don't think it's a case of dealing with them or not. I don't have an issue with that. My issue is that in telling the story, I'm talking about Amy again, I'm not talking about Maradona here. In telling the story the way they did in Amy, they were playing exactly the same game. They were indulging, they were giving you, it was all, oh, here's footage you've never seen before. Here's her private home footage. There was a point in it where she's in rehab, and there's a lot of home footage in it, and it's home footage that's been filmed by her boyfriend.
Yeah.
And he's trying to get her to sing Rehab, which is her hit, and kind of change the words, because it's all about, the song is, I said no, no, no. He wants her to, oh, go on, do a little playful version, change the words. And she's not really into it. And you can tell she's not. And he says, it's just for our personal private film. And I'm like, well, it's not now, is it?
No.
Everyone can see it.
But,
and I found that out of order. I did not like
Well, but
that.
I think that's part of what that film and the Maradona film are doing. That kind of like these people are absolutely raped, by everybody. And actually what's kind of most disconcerting is that, they're often violated by the people closest to them and, exploited by their family, by their boyfriends, by, like, everybody wants something.
How did the filmmakers get hold of that footage?
They bought it.
It was given to them, they had it, they are part of it. That's what I had the problem with. They are part of it. And what's really disturbing is it took me 5 or 6 pages of looking through Rotten Tomatoes reviews to find one that said that. Oh. Everyone said this is fantastic, and there were like 2 or 3 negative reviews that said like it doesn't really explain why she did self-destructed. I didn't feel it, but it took such a long time until I saw someone else say this is wrong.
Well, I don't think it's wrong. I don't. I don't think the film. I don't think the film exploits her in the sense that she's dead. But what you see very clearly is how even those who are closest to her, are exploiting her. I noticed that very much with the boyfriend and the father.
Yeah.
Right? And I like that because I think the film shows how complex things are, how there's often mixed motives, how nothing is clear, right? How, when you're drawn to that level of fame and money and so on, even a father who clearly loves his daughter is basically like pushing her to do things, so that the money can come in.
Yeah, there's that point in the film where she's trying to get away. She goes to an island or something, and she takes her dad with her, who's been kind of supportive since she's reconnected with him. But he brings along a camera crew and sound guy and stuff, and is trying to get her to be part of some little film he's making.
Yeah,
and that's the point that he's using her. There's no peace, no escape. Even from a family. Yeah. It's awful, it's horrible, and I completely agree, and I think all those points are well made, except that the film itself is doing it too.
Well, okay, there's questions about the time and so on. She's already dead by the time the film is made, so I think it's an exploration of an image, and a person who's no longer alive, whereas actually all the things that are pictured in the film happened when she was alive, and it was actually the people who loved her that were doing it. That's, to me, what makes the film so fascinating. I do think that this is different.
Yeah, it is.
He is alive, and I don't know what it says about me, I really loved to see him suffer. I did.
Well, you're a Catholic too.
I know, and I identified with him. I think life is difficult. And you think, like, if you were like an international superstar, and 25... and you had all these pressures on you, and everybody wanted something. Would you have been able to resist the lure of cocaine? I've done it, and it makes you feel good. And I could just I completely understood it, and I also understood like his remorse and his regret, and how he wished he treated people better. Right, because the thing about Maradona is you really feel at every moment that his heart is in the right place and that he is a loving, generous person, right? And then kind of, his celebrity and, the way that he's made an icon, and other people put him in a position where kind of, certain things become impossible. The saddest thing for me was and what I wanted to know more about was the ending shot, because so finally at the end of the film he recognizes the son who he disavowed initially.
30 years later,
but also, do you think, did he always disavow him? Did he never pay child support? Did he have a relationship with him in secret whilst in public he didn't recognize? I mean, or did he completely ignore? Because he does say at a certain point in the film something like, for the first 3 years, I don't want to have anything to do with him and I didn't care. But then that kind of suggests that
in between there may have been something else.
Yeah, between the age of 3 and 30, there must have been something, or you hope there was something, right? I like that the film deals with messiness, with things that are not nice.
Do you think there's a hagiographical aspect to the film?
No, not at all.
Okay. And
the reason why is because of what I'm saying, that it shows him being so weak, and selfish and greedy, and... But you're saying you find it very sympathetic. I do.
And kind of understandable, and he's not a villain really at all. Even though I would kind of suggest that he is, and to me, certainly with cheating on his girlfriend, and it's kind of explained as he's doing it all the time, and she was very naive and just accepted that his lies.
This is where I think
that is something that is...
That's where I think you're moralistic, because I can not only see, I think I'm a very truthful person, but I have found myself in kind of situations where you don't always tell the truth, where you fudge it, where you have several things going on at once, and I kind of, and that's a terrible trait, and kind of, you're right to condemn it or whatever, but so the reason why the film is not a hagiography is because you see all of these things about Maradona. You see him like super fat and ugly, you see him crying, you see him with the drug taking and the whores, and it's not shown to say, oh wow, what an exciting dynamic life this handsome guy had. He's not like Mr. James Bond playboy, right? This is all seen as a slide into seaminess and disgustingness and out of controlness, right? I mean, because actually nothing that you see in this film is any different than what you see in a Bond film. But in a Bond film, it's super cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's but then maybe that's like a long-term sort of thing. It's like this is the stuffing that he has to go through to become Saint Diego.
No, but the thing is, his son Diego, at the age of 25, after he wins the national title with Naples, he is San Diego, right? And he is God. So actually, what you see then is like, it's...
Well, I mean, Saint Diego, like, to us now, with the benefit of hindsight, like, so he's now Saint Diego because of what he's been through and he's come out of it, and that's what the film...
What I like about him, what I admire
he comes out of the
him,
film ultimately with a positive sort of outcome.
Well, he comes out as very lovable, the way that an old drunken uncle of yours would be, but without the glory. Yeah, kind of, the thing about him is that he renders himself emotionally accessible at all times. He's a man who's in tune with his desires and his feelings, and you get the whole gamut of them. From he loves his mom and dad, he supports all his siblings, he feels guilty, he's obviously involved with his childhood girlfriend, but then he can't resist the lure of this sexy blonde in Italy, right? Like, there's that poster of that glamorous woman where he like kisses her,
He kisses her face, but her tits and pussy are out.
Okay.
He kisses his hand and then touches his hand to her face. Yeah.
Kind of, it's not acceptable, but it's so understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of, you can imagine anybody else doing it, really. So I love that about the film.
It's interesting how the film kind of shows him achieving such great things. He wins a title with Napoli, who the previous season had just escaped relegation. This is not a big team. He wasn't joining Internazionale. He wasn't joining Milan.
It's all about him.
He was the guy who brought them this title, and then 4 years later he brings them another one, and that's huge. And then he's the one who beats England. He's the one who wins the World Cup, and despite the fact that he has these extraordinary achievements, and I don't think it's the film's fault. I think it's kind of interesting though how they are made to seem small or forgettable. Like you forget them almost immediately because his life moves quickly and there's more problems for him. You know, it's kind of interesting. Like there's a point in it where when he's won the second title with Napoli, or is it when he's won the UEFA Cup, he says, "This is the biggest title of my career, it's the biggest celebration." And then he's asked, "What about the World Cup?" And he says something like, do you remember that bit?
I do remember that
scene. He says, it's like, he says at one point, "Napoli is my home," he says. It's as though he kind of no longer thinks of Argentina as his home. I can't remember exactly what he says, but it's interesting that you would think that the World Cup, especially back then, before European competition was as big as it is now, would be the biggest thing.
No, what he says is that he can't feel the same way about winning the World Cup because actually he was rejected by Argentina and he wasn't selected for the 1978 team.
That's right. The 1978 World Cup was taken away from me and I wasn't able to win it with the team.
Yeah.
Which they did win, but he wasn't part of the team. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
So
whereas Napoli says, "Napoli is my home," and I'm at home.
Yeah.
And then that kind of leads into him saying, prior to the Argentina-Italy match in the '90 World Cup, which is played at Napoli Stadium,
yes,
he says in the press, I would like it if the Napoli fans would support Argentina.
Yeah.
You know, which kind of feeds into that. So you know, then it leads into Argentina winning the game on penalties and him being persona non grata in Italy. But there's an interesting thing that it's also suggests that he kind of stoked tensions.
Well,
you know, and there's that tension that we were talking about Napoli being kind of non-Italian. Did he stoke that? Did he pick up on that? Because then the fans have
that pre-existed him.
No, but the point, did he stoke that? That's the point.
No, I don't think he stoked it. I think he believed it.
Yeah.
I think that was presented to him and he believed it. And actually, one of the things that the film shows is that if you're a stranger and an immigrant, you're always a stranger and an immigrant, and as soon as they have no use for you, they boot you out. That's what the film shows, right? So kind of Argentina ends up being home in spite of, you know, his feelings at the beginning because, you know, he was not chosen for the Argentine team in the 1978. So he arrives in Napoli and, you know, he wins everything and people love him and worship him and whatever. And, you know, so he thinks, oh, well, you know, I'm now a Neapolitan. And then the first wrong move and it's like, get out of here, you nigger stranger, right? Like, that's basically what it amounts to.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that the film is really wonderful in showing that, in demonstrating that. But
there is a feeling when it gets to that point and he's ultimately leaving Napoli, there's a feeling of kind of, okay, the adventure's over, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, he leaves home immediately overnight. I mean, he knows that, right? It's been told him that, you know, he's been persecuted, and as soon as he tests positive, he knows it's all over, and he packs up overnight and leaves. Right? That's kind of, I think, fascinating. Before we want to wrap up, I want to ask a kind of a theoretical question, which had occurred to me while watching the film, which is, what is directing, or the job of a director in a film which is almost entirely found footage? I mean, you know, is the director of this film not the editor? What does a director do in a film that is almost entirely found footage? I don't know.
I suppose it's about marshalling. I suppose it's about working out from the, you know, kind of, I would assume, mass of kind of footage and interview and so on at his disposal. What are the themes you want to draw out? What's the story you want to tell? Just because you don't do it with shots that you create yourself. Is that not done by
the editor?
Well, I suppose it's a joint sort of. I mean, I imagine like the editor will have the director sitting over his shoulder when he's making.
I know that. You know, so it might be a collaborative thing.
Yeah.
But actually, this is a very beautifully edited film, I think.
I'd imagine it is all collaborative. I mean, that is what filmmaking is. Very, very seldom do you get like a Steven Soderbergh who's like, I'll do it all myself and I'll just give myself loads of pseudonyms.
No, but you can imagine a narrative film or even a documentary of a different kind. You know, you can say, the director will say, put the camera here, put the light there, I want this rhythm, I want to get this effect or whatever. But I think almost all of the effects in this film are actually obtained through editing and structure, you know. So, I'm just asking the question because I don't know the answer to it. I think it's an interesting question.
I'm not a filmmaker either. Maybe we should ask someone who is. Maybe
Well,
we should email Asif Kapadia and say, what did you do?
Yes. Did you do anything at all? Or were you just there bossing the editor?
Yeah. Well, one would assume that he conducted the interviews as well that form part of it. And
except I thought, so, you were saying how the film is narrated. I don't think it is narrated. I mean, I think there are interviews with the trainer.
No, I didn't say it's narrated, but there are points in which interviews are brought in.
Yeah. But I think it's a wonderful film, partly because it's not narrated. There isn't a voiceover narration.
Yes, yeah.
So kind of meaning is constructed through the footage, through bits of dialogue, sound, music, structure. There isn't a voice of God telling you what to think about what you're seeing.
No, it's people telling the story when they are brought in.
Yeah.
And when they are, it's not overbearing or anything like that. They are their points of view and what they say work really smoothly in tandem with the footage and with what is said by people. Because a lot of the footage is of interviews and stuff themselves from the time. So, I mean, I think it is in that respect, in just kind of a technical sense, it is brilliantly made.
Yes, I think it's brilliant.
As was Amy and Senna, were Amy and Senna. They flow really, really naturally and organically, and I think tell their stories kind of really well in that sense. So I mean that's a huge achievement actually, because that can't be easy. Yeah.
Anyway,
and for it to seem so effortless,
There are two great documentaries that are out at the moment. I think this is one of them. I think it's a truly great film. The other one is Amazing Grace, which is also doing the rounds, and which, I thought was sublime. So if you love documentaries and you love cinema, go see Maradona and go see Amazing Grace.
I don't love documentaries, so I won't see Amazing Grace.
It's an interesting thing about Aretha Franklin, because I broke up with a boyfriend because he didn't like Aretha Franklin. I thought, well, if you don't like Aretha Franklin, you can't understand me.
Really?
Like I'll never get to know you. Fuck off.
Did you not feel he respected you?
No, I just think that there's something about Aretha, about like the way that she sings and pain and, kind of the complexities of emotion and just that huge talent, right? Like, her voice soars and it just hits you in a particular way. And also she's very controlled in what her voice does. And I think if you can't understand that voice and what the singer does with it, then I don't think you'll ever be able to understand me,
Wow.
So, yeah.
Big words.
That's true.
I was the same way with S Club 7.
Well, there you go.
If you don't like Reach, if you don't know all the words to Reach, then you're out of my life.
Anyway, we are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube to listen to us, and on social media we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies is the handle, and our website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Yes, thank you very much for listening.
Bye bye.